Okay, so welcome to Test 5, Passage 1. Let's just get started. This passage is called Miami Time. It's about this Native American narrator's experience learning about Miami time from her grandmother, and her experience with the Miami time. It seems to be something where you get lost in the moment of doing something, and I guess the typical way you think about time, where you feel about time, sort of changes, where small moments can seem like they take a long time, or vice versa. So this first question is this first sentence: my family is part of the Miami tribe, a Native American people with strong ties to territory in present-day Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. All right, first thing you want to keep an eye on is that the complete sentence is this part: my family is part of the Miami tribe. That is a complete subject, complete verb. And then you have this part, Native American people. This is a description for tribe, or if you want to be more complete about it, for Miami tribe. And so what you need to have is a modifier after. So it's my family is part of the Miami tribe, comma, a Native American people with strong ties to territory in present day, blah blah blah. So you do need this comma here to separate this, but you don't need a comma here. Two reasons. First of all, you don't need that comma because you shouldn't separate a noun from the preposition or the prepositional phrase that goes with the noun. So with is the preposition, so there shouldn't be that comma separation. The other thing is that you'd only have a comma following if this is basically an interrupting modifier, if this is a modifier part of for this noun, and then the sentence continues on. But this case, it doesn't really continue on. This is a situation where you basically just have one big modifier for tribe. So there's nothing that comes after, and certainly to have a comma here breaks that modifier up unnecessarily. So the only comma that you should be having is right after tribe. All right. So if you go to it, the only answer choice that actually makes sense is C. Tribe, comma, a Native American people block. That's perfectly fine. A would be wrong just because it's the given, and B is wrong because it has the comma here, which is fine, but it's wrong because it has a comma after Native American, and Native American is basically just an adjective for people. What kind of people? Native American people. So you shouldn't have commas between the adjectives and the nouns that they modify, so this would be wrong. And then with D, you have this semicolon. Now the thing with this semicolon is that what comes before a semicolon, what comes after the semicolon, they have to be two independent clauses. So my family is part of the Miami tribe, independent clause, that's fine. What comes after though is basically just a noun with a bunch of prepositional phrases. Native American people, the noun, preposition, with strong ties to territory in present day, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, but there's no verb. So what came after that semicolon is incomplete, so D is wrong. All right? So let's go to number 2. At this point, the writer would like to provide a glimpse into the grandmother's interest, given that all the choices are true. Which one best accomplishes this purpose? Well, what does she say? When she was doing something she loved, whether it was making freezer jam or researching tribal history, she refused. Okay, well, this is somewhat description of what her interests are. She likes making jam, researching tribal history. It's pretty specific. So that seems to do that, right? What about G? Being actively involved in her pursuits? Well, it says that she has interests, but it doesn't say which ones they are. It doesn't provide a glimpse into her interests. We don't get to see what they're like. And what about H? Things I really hope she'll teach me one day. It doesn't really say anything about what they are. It's about as vague in general as this one. And then J, historical research as well as domestic projects. Well, that is basically more general version of this. Domestic projects would be freezer jam or making freezer jam, and then researching tribal history is historical research. The only problem is that this is a lot more general. So we don't really get to see what our actual interests are. We just got to see like general genres of interests. So the only one that really is specific and gets down to it is the given one, no change. And J would probably be the next best answer, but certainly because you have the more specific one, just pick the more specific one. All right. Number 3. All right. Number 3. She refused to be rushed in a hurry. So when you see this, what should strike out at you is that it says in a hurry and it says rushed. Okay. Now I know that's obvious, but if you're rushed, you're in a hurry. If you're in a hurry, you're rushed. So this is an issue of repetition, of redundancy, and certainly D is the only one that cuts that all out and makes it just much more concise, much more straight to the point. Hurried or rushed, you don't really need to say both. And then made to go faster or rushed, it's the same redundancy issue, made to go faster, rushed. So rushed just by itself, or in a hurry, or hurried by itself would be fine. In this case, rushed is the given answer choice. So D is the correct answer. Number 4. All right, number 4. It says, if we were running late for an appointment, she would chide us by saying, okay, what should strike you immediately? It says, if we were running late for an appointment, you have the word if. So what does if do? Well, if basically sets up a clause that is dependent. If this, then something else, right? Well, if by itself is not an independent clause. If is saying, well, if this one thing first, then what? Well, what this sentence does, it ends that if dependent clause with a period. So that cannot work. Okay? So that is the error with no change. If you have G, it's the same problem, because instead of a period, you have a semicolon. What comes before the semicolon needs to be an independent clause, and in this case, because the sentence starts with if, it's not an independent clause. This is a dependent clause, part of, a dependent clause that goes with an independent clause that should follow after. And then what about H, appointment and she? Well, this really does the same thing, because if it just has this word and, it's basically just saying if we were running late for an appointment and she would chide us by saying, that's like saying if I was hungry and it was late at night, I would go to the diner. I would go to the restaurant. If I was hungry and it was late at night. Because if, it's saying under both of those conditions, then I would do something else. Well, that's not what this sentence is trying to say. So that would distort and change the meaning of this sentence. The other problem, it's a bit of a less serious problem, but you have a new subject here, right? So if you have a new subject here, as part of this this smaller clause, you would need a comma after appointment, okay? So that is the problem, lack of a comma. But this is the smaller error. The other error, the larger and more serious error, is just the fact that this would still be an independent, or this would still be a dependent clause otherwise. And then again, if you have this comma, that also just doesn't finish things quite well. You would have to say just comma, then the independent clause. If I do this, then this. Or if I do this, I will do it. Just say it right out. If you say the and, it messes up the format and messes up the structure. And in these cases, you got to follow that proper sentence structure for the if-then type of situation. If you have J, this solves that. It says, conversely, if we are rushing late for an appointment, she would chide us. If we were doing this, she would do this. Or the other situation, if we did this, then she would chide us, okay? But in this case, you certainly don't need the word then. You don't need the adverb then. You can just go right out and say she, okay? So you have the completely independent clause, she would chide us, and the rest, okay? This is really the essential. That's the independent clause that holds everything together. All right. 5. Given that all the choices are true, which one provides the best opening to this paragraph? Okay. It was a difficult concept for me to grasp. And now what does this paragraph talk about? How her grandma is trying to explain what is Miami time. Well, it gives this big explanation for it. And so what should the topic sentence be about? The topic sentence, having trouble speaking. The topic sentence should be giving the topic of the whole paragraph. Just like a thesis gives the topic of the whole essay or the whole passage, the topic sentence should say, what is the paragraph about? Now, it was a difficult concept for me to grasp, seems to envelope the whole concept of the grandmother needing to explain, Miami time is this, do you understand? Do you understand? So A seems to work. What about I remember being late for a doctor's appointment one day? Well, that has nothing to do with this. That has to do with the last sentence of the last paragraph. What about my grandmother lived with us and as a result she and I became close over the years? Well, this has nothing to do with the explanation of Miami time. If this was a topic sentence, that would mean the paragraph should be about how they got closer, like how their relationship got stronger. And if you look at D, it says, my son asked me about my grandmother, whom he never met. Okay, the problem with this is that it has really nothing to do with the topic, all right? So this is the problem here, and so, the only answer choice that works at all is A. It was a difficult concept. Number 6. All right. It says, my grandmother tried to explain that Miami time referred to those moments when time seemed to slow down or stand still. All right. Is there anything wrong with this? I mean, if you want to be very, let's say, technical about it, the format of having a comma before when isn't always wrong, and it's not always correct. It depends on the meaning of the sentence. So in this case, this would actually be wrong. The reason is you have to look at the meaning. It says refer to those moments when time seems to slow down or stand still. Well, it's not this by itself, right? If you just say moments or those moments, we have no idea which moments they're talking about. So it says when time seems to slow down or stand still, we know that's key to understanding what moments mean. It's essential to the meaning of the term moments, okay? This relative pronoun when is very important to understanding this definition. You could almost say it's part of that definition. It's part of that meaning, all right? Versus if I said, explain that Miami time referred to present awareness time. I guess maybe that's the way of describing it. If I wrote those present awareness moments, then I could have a comma when time seemed to, because present awareness moments is clear enough and specific enough where we know what kind of moments is it talking about? Oh, the present moment awareness. And this would just be an extra sort of description that is not necessarily needed, but helps. As in, it doesn't affect the meaning of this. It doesn't change anything if you said present awareness moments. But in this case, this sort of does very clearly change the meaning of this. All right? It makes it talk about a specific type of moment that is needed to understand what kind of moments it's talking about. All right? So F would not work just because, again, that this by itself or this by itself needs this description so we know which moments are being referred to. Okay? But if you have G, moments when, that obviously does the job. Okay? No comma. Because that whole part is essential to understanding what kind of moments is it. All right? And then H, moments as if. Well, as if is not a proper description or a proper use of the phrase as if. if it says Miami time referred to those moments, as if means pretend like it did, or close to, okay, or almost like. But this is actually a straight up definition, okay. And then you have J. J because is the a problem, because I say because a lot. Because the word because basically means something is happening for this reason. I am hungry because I didn't eat before, and this is not happening because of that, right? You don't have that kind of one thing leading to another type of situation. This is a situation where one is simply explaining or defining something. And so because doesn't logically work at all, right? Let's go on to the next question. 7. It says, slow down or stand still. Recently, the meaning of her words started to sink in. This seems to be perfectly fine, okay? What about spoken statements to my ears? That's, I mean, that's like when someone's trying to impress you, they say like very verbose ways of saying things. You can just say words. Expressed opinions on the matter. You can just say words, and verbal remarks in conversation. I mean, all of these are very verbose. All of these are just basically are way too wordy, and you can tighten all of these up just by replacing it with the words. So A would be the correct answer. It's just the most concise answer choice, straight to the point. All right, number 8. Number 8, it says, one morning my son and I will inadvertently slip. Okay, this one is a bit easier. It says one morning, indicating this happened sometime in the past. One morning I woke up. One morning something happened. All right, is this past or is this future? Well, that's future, okay? So F doesn't work. What about G? Well, that's present tense. That doesn't work either. What about H? Are inadvertently slipping. That's also present tense. What about J? This is the only past tense. That's the only one that can work. All right? So J is the correct answer. Number 9. Number 9. On a familiar trail near our house, I was pushing Jeremy in a stroller, and we're thinking of the day ahead and the tasks I had to complete. All right. Well, what should stick out to you is what's the subject here? The subject is I. The verb is was pushing. And what seems to be happening is you have this word and you have what? Were thinking. So this seems to be a compound verb situation. Okay, compound verb meaning there's one subject and two verbs, or there could be multiple subjects, but there's two verbs in that sentence, or maybe more than two. All right, so two or more. Okay, well, if there's a compound verb situation, well, what's the subject? The subject is singular, right? Singular. So this is fine. I was pushing. You don't say I were pushing. But what about were thinking? Was I were thinking? No, because this goes with plural. I think some people might think this, and they might pick or think this is correct because it says Jeremy, okay, I guess the baby or the son. And people think, well, there's, two subjects. Well, no, it's not two subjects. I was pushing Jeremy. Jeremy is simply the object of this sentence. It's the direct. What was being pushed? Jeremy was being pushed, right? In his stroller. So this is not the subject. Jeremy, not the subject. You only have one subject. So it needs to be I was pushing Jeremy in his stroller and was thinking of the day ahead, or just and thinking of the day ahead. Okay? Because also, Jeremy's probably not thinking about the day ahead. She's probably just describing herself. So even if you just logically think it out, it doesn't really make sense to have a plural there where Jeremy and I are both doing the verbs, okay? So A wouldn't be right. Were having thoughts is the same type of problem where you have this plural. Thinking certainly works, and if you have D, that doesn't work, because if you just cross this out, it says I was pushing Jeremy in his stroller and of the day. Well, and what of the day? You need some kind of verb there. Thinking of doing this and something else. Well, you basically just delete an essential part of that sentence, and then if you delete it, the sentence no longer makes sense. So the only answer choice that works is C. 10. Let's look at 10. It says there, 2 does and 3 fawns stood watching us. Is there anything wrong with this? No, it's just saying that, those does. Doe is a deer and a fawn is a baby deer. So 2 does and 3 fawns were watching us. That's like saying Bob was watching me, or Bob and Jane were watching me. Do I need commas in between? No, you don't need commas between 2 things. Now, if it said 2 does, comma, 3 fawns, comma, and 5 gorillas were watching me, that's a list of more than 2, so you would need commas there. But in a situation like this, no, you don't need that at all. Okay, you have a compound subject, subject 1, subject 2, and the verb phrase. Okay, so you certainly don't need any type of punctuation. All of those have that unnecessary punctuation. This one, because it has this comma right after the noun before the verb. Obviously, you don't split up the subject from the verb with commas. You just say subject verb. You just say whatever it is. And certainly, again, you wouldn't have that comma there. If you have a comma in a list, you would need to have it before the and, not after the and. But because it's only 2 things, it's not even a list. Obviously this is a better form of this, you could say, but again, you don't need that comma there because this is not a list of more than 2 things, right? For the sake of the logic and coherence of this paragraph, sentence 3 should be placed. All right, let's look at sentence 3. It says, there 2 does and 3 fawns stood watching us. Okay, well, let's see if it makes sense here. Suddenly, he squealed with pure delight and pointed toward a clearing. There, 2 does and 3 fawns stood watching us, 5 pairs of ears. That seems to make perfect sense because it says 5 pairs of ears. Well, if you didn't have this explanation, we'd be like, well, what has 5 pairs of ears? What are you talking about? And then it says, Jeremy squealed with pure delight and pointed toward a clearing. He's like, look. Well, look what? Oh, look there. So this perfectly seems to make sense where it is now. What about before sentence 1? If you have before sentence 1, it says there 2 does and 3 fawns stood watching us. Well, first of all, you have this there. Where is this there? One morning? Well, one morning is like a time location. Is like based on time. It's not a physical where type of location. So that doesn't really work. The other thing is, it just talks about how, oh, there's a bunch of deer, and then she's like, well, I was pushing Jeremy and I was thinking about the day ahead. It sort of breaks up that idea, and then it reintroduces it back here later, as it's pointed out. So there's no logical proper order to it. What about after sentence 1? You have a similar sort of issue where you basically have there. Oh, there! Look, there. There were a bunch of deer, and then it says suddenly he squealed with pure delight and pointed. Well, if he's pointing, the there should come after the pointed, okay? And again, when you have 5 pairs of ears flicked like antenna, that should, in a more logical sense, refer directly to the sentence prior, because you don't know the ears of what. It's not necessarily clear grammatically, but if you have fawns and does in the sentences immediately prior, it's very clear. Now, obviously, even if it wasn't there, you could probably figure it out, but in grammar, you want to make things as clear as possible, and in this sense, placing the sentence here would be the clearest. And then if you have after sentence 4, well, 5 pairs of ears flick like antenna, seeking a signal. Well, you could say Jeremy's pointing at the ears, flicking like antenna. Is he pointing at the ears, or is he probably pointing at the deer? He's pointing at the deer that are over there, right? And furthermore, if you have the 5 pairs of ears that comes first, it's sort of unclear what it's like. What is this, like a mystery novel? We're supposed to figure out what ears they are? No, it just says here the deer and then the ears. Okay, so we know what animal, or we know what, I guess, body part for which type of animal is being discussed. All right. So the only answer choice that really works is A. 12. Lizards lazing in the sun and quail rustled through grasses surprised us. All right, this is an issue of parallelism. On parallelism, again, as I've said before, they're like parallel lines in grammar. You want to make things follow consistent structure, especially in lists or in lists of, even just two things. You have lizards lazing, quail rustled. Well, lizard lazing is not underlined by the ACT, right? So that has to be the correct form. So you have to switch this to match this. Is this participle matched with a participle here? No, this is past tense. This is a past participle. Okay? Rustled. So you need to change it to the present participle, rustling. Lizards lazing and quail rustling. Surprised us. Okay? You could even, these basically just act as, you could even just use them as adjectives. You could say lazing lizards and rustling quail if you remove those prepositional phrases. But regardless, you do need to have that parallel structure. Otherwise, it just messes the whole situation up where you have present tense and then you have past tense, and that just doesn't work. Okay, so obviously G would work, and F does not work. Were rustling has that same problem. It's a lack of parallelism where it does have the word rustling, but were is past tense, right? Lazing is present tense. Just in this situation, this present tense that they were kind of in the act of doing it, and then you have this were. Well, is this parallel anymore? If you have lizards lazing and then you have quail and then you have this extra verb were, is that the same? Is that the same structure? No, not the same structure. So just make sure, just keep it simple. Just make sure everything matches. All right. And then delete. If you just delete it, well, what are they doing through the grasses? Lizards are lazing and quail through the grasses. Is it just talking about quail, the quail that are somehow through the grasses, which doesn't even make sense? What are they, like, impaled by the grass? The grass is going through their bodies? No, they're rustling through the grasses. They're like moving around, shaking their feathers and stuff like that. So that would also change the meaning, and it would also mess up the parallelism that needs to be there. So the only answer choice that makes sense is G. All right, 13. It says, for example, or it says, wild blackberries melted on our tongues. For example, the aroma of crushed eucalyptus leaves tingled in our noses. Okay, this is a situation where it doesn't really make sense to have the word for example, because what does an example mean? It's an example of something, as in it's a more specific case of a general whole. Well, wild blackberries melted on our tongues. Is the aroma of crushed eucalyptus leaves tingling in our noses? Is that an example of the blackberries that you're eating or that they're eating? No, it's not an example. It's just another aspect of their experience there. It's like saying, the smell in the room was of butter. I don't know. And the chairs were made of wood. I don't say that, for example, the chairs are made of wood. You just kind of just say the descriptions all in a row. You can use things like furthermore if you want, but in this case, it's really just not needed at all. B, on the other hand, means on one hand this, on the other hand this, okay? It's like a contrast, okay? On the one hand, I like to exercise. On the other hand, I don't really like to get, sweaty. So that's a problem, right? That's a contrast. Well, this one, there is no contrast here between blackberries melting on your tongue and the aroma of something. There's no contrast there, all right? So logically, this does not make sense. Just in case also does not make sense logically. Just in case sort of means in the event that something happens, or sort of like, to prevent something from happening, like, in case something happens though, watch out, you know what I mean, in case of fire, all right? And this is certainly not a case or a situation like that. This is basically just descriptive details, all right? So the D seems to work the best. It definitely just gives straight up this. There's no need for any kinds of transition, and the only kinds of transition words that would make sense would be things like, furthermore, moreover, things that suggest consistency or just additional description. And none of these really do that, okay? So D is the only one that works. 14, yet the hike felt shorter than ever. All right, what the problem you have here is that you have this adverb, then. That's incorrect. This is a comparison situation. The hike is being compared, or I guess the length of the hike is being compared to ever. All right, I guess all the experiences that they had before. So there's two things that are being compared here, ever and the hike. All right, so this is fine, shorter, right? You don't say shortest when you're only comparing two things. You say shortest when you're comparing three things or more. But in this case, you're only comparing two things, so this is fine. But when you're comparing, you need to use not THEN, but the preposition than, THAN, all right? Then means more like, I went to the movies. Then I got some popcorn. I don't know, something like that, all right? But this would be a different use. This is used for comparative purposes. So shorter than, J obviously sticks out. That's the correct. That should be the correct answer. Shortest. This is when you're comparing three or more. We're only comparing two things. This is called a superlative. This is comparative. So you're only comparing two things. So this would be wrong. If you say more shorter than, well, this has two problems. First of all, this should say THAN. Okay. The other thing is that shorter is already comparative. If you have this word more, that's basically doubling up, all right? That's incorrect. You just pick one or the other, and it's not always a matter of, well, which one should I pick? Maybe I should use more short. Well, no, it depends on the word. Like the word more short is not proper for short, okay? The comparative form of short is shorter. So in this case, more shorter would be incorrect. You have to say just shorter. Or even if you said more short, that's also incorrect. So the only answer choice that works is shorter than, J. And last, it says, suppose the writer's goal had been to write a brief essay conveying a personal experience with Miami time. Would this essay successfully fulfill that goal? Well, yeah, doesn't it? It talks about her personal experience, how she's walking, little Jeremy in the morning, and it's like, wow, dear, So that seems to do that, right? Yes, because it presents the narrator's first-hand experience of a morning spent in Miami time. That seems to be perfect. What about, yes, because it reveals that after a conversation with the grandmother, the narrator decided to live in Miami time? Is she living in it? She's like, I'm going to be like, the way I felt when I watched the deer, I want to be like that forever. I mean, maybe that would be very enjoyable, but that's certainly not what she's trying to say, and certainly she seems like a pretty new person to it, like a newbie. I'm not sure if she can get to a point where she can always live there, and it's not even that she would always want to live there. And didn't the grandmother say sometimes you gotta hurry and not live in Miami time? So that's not the case. What about C? No, because it shares the views of more than one person with regard to the meaning of Miami time. It's not the views of more than one person. The narrator is learning from the grandmother. It's not like she's saying, well, my grandmother thinks this and I think of it this way. No, she's like, my grandmother thinks this and I have to learn. I'm trying to learn from her. So it's basically one view of it, okay? And this really doesn't have to do much with the personal experience, right? And what about D? Because the term Miami time belonged to the grandmother, not to the narrator. No, first of all, this doesn't have to do with a personal experience. I mean, none of these really have much to do with a great experience in Miami time. Even B doesn't, it just talks about it. But D does not work because it's not that Miami time belongs to the grandmother, it's an experience that she has of living sometimes. and she's trying to explain it to the narrator. So the only answer choice that actually has anything that's true from the essay and that has a personal experience with Miami time is A. And again, you could also just narrow it down just from knowing that this seemed to have fulfilled that, so both of the no answers would probably be wrong. So that's it. Good job, with passage 1 and following along. Whenever you're ready, we'll go on to passage 2 for test 5.